The Type 63 is a light amphibious tank, which was developed from the Type 60, which was in itself developed from the Soviet PT-76 that we have in-game. So, in the late 50s, they looked at the Type 60 and decided that they wanted a little bit more, so they created the Type 63. For me personally, looking at it, what I see is a fat PT-76. It has a slightly different turret. It has an 85mm rifled gun. It also has access to a 7.62 in-game, but could also have a 12.7 as well. The elevation of it being -4 to +18, and one of the curious things is that this didn't have a stabilizer when I was testing it out, meaning that its gun was bobbing up all over the place, which was kind of interesting. The reason why they needed a light amphibious tank though, because it was intended for reconnaissance, patrol, river crossing operations, amphibious landings, you know, all of that stuff. So being able to create a tank which would work for those things, but maybe not other roles, was definitely something they were trying to do. And if you look at it from that way, the Type 63 is a success. It was also designed to support infantry and engage lightly armored targets. So even though this thing has the name of a tank, it's very hard to see it as a tank. It's much more of that support vehicle, reconnaissance vehicle kind of thing, which you would find. It had very thin armor on it. We're talking about 10mm all around, very similar to the PT-76. The maximum armor it had was 14mm, which is pretty much only stopping small arms fire. The weak armored protection of the tank caused heavy losses for it and casualties during the military conflicts it actually found itself in, and the first production vehicles lacked MBC protection systems as well. The T-63 actually has a complete turret of another tank. The Type 63 has a complete turret of a different tank that we actually have in War Thunder, the Type 62, which is kind of interesting. So what we have in our version of War Thunder, we have the PT-76 and the Type 62, which is a gift vehicle. So if you marry the two together, make the PT-76 pregnant, so it's a little bit more swollen, what you get yourself is a Type 63. So this could definitely be added quite easily. The main difference, as I said though, even though it had a more powerful armament than the PT-76, was the fact that it had the non-stabilized gun, which may actually be its detriment when we look at it from a War Thunder point of view. It was able to fire 8 rounds a minute though. It was loaded manually, and the secondary armament, being the 7.62, obviously doesn't help that much in War Thunder, but I'm sure when you're supporting infantry, it's a nice little thing to have. It was powered by the 12150L diesel engine. Was able to have 400 horsepower, which was much more powerful than the 240 horsepower engine of the PT-76. Subsequently, because of this, its mobility and cross-country performance improved, and it uses a number of automotive components of the Type 77 amphibious APC, meaning that it is fully amphibious with 2 water jets and has a maximum amphibious speed of around about 12 kilometers an hour. They actually made an upgraded version of the Type 63. It had a 105mm rifled gun. That would be very interesting to see, but I think personally, let's just stick with this one first. So what are we getting from this if this ever comes to our side of the server? Well, you get an upgunned PT-76, but it does lose its stabilizer, but it does gain a hell of a lot of speed. I think this thing would be quite a bit of fun, especially if it was given the scouting role, which I think it deserves. When it comes to what tree should it be in, well, this is definitely a Chinese vehicle through and through, even though it was once again developed through a Soviet vehicle. This has to be put in a Chinese version of a tech tree and nothing else. Will it be that useful in War Thunder? Probably not, but then again, nippy tanks with decent guns definitely always will have a place in War Thunder, depending on what BR they're put at. So the only issue this thing is really going to run into is obviously planes. The BR365A APHE-BC round is its main round that it uses, but it also gets access to HEAT-FS, APCR, and APC-BC. So you have AP with HE filler, and then you have HEAT-FS. This thing can do a hell of a lot of damage if left up to its own regards with its 7 or 8 second reload. And because it's manually loaded, that means that your crew skills actually matter in it, meaning that it may become a much better machine with time. I'm hoping that we get a Chinese tech tree so we see these weird and wonderful vehicles which are different enough to be able to put in the game, but still similar, so people will be able to use them without really any issues. With the breakdown of the relationships between Mao Zedong and Nikita Khrushchev in 1960, what happened from then is the Soviets pretty much withdrew all of their support for the Chinese when it came to their engineers and their insights and everything like that when it came to tank design. In 1962, at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Mao actually said that the USSR's premier was a capitulationist, which is a wonderful term. But anyway, this kind of shows that the diplomatic relations between the two nations, mainly down to ideological issues, kind of separated by the time of the mid-60s to late 70s. So because of the political events, this meant that Chinese tanks, which were modeled mainly after Soviet models at the time, were left to be upgraded with Western components of various types. So this meant torsion bars, FCS, laser RF, optics, and also main gun improvements. And these series of modernizations were intended for a possible conflict with the Soviets, and the greatest interest was mainly down to the level of advancement of Soviet designs in the late 1960s. So obviously, if you are friends with a nation, and then those relationships break down massively, you have to now see them as a threat instead of just a friend on your side. So having a look at the Soviet tanks, you have to make sure that you yourself are at that level. So by the late 1960s, this meant that China created the Type 69. The latter was still largely the Type 59, so what is meant by that is the majority of the fighting force of the PLA was Type 59s, but the 69s were created to try and supplement them, which is always nice. Also, by 1969, the Chinese were able to capture a T-62 from the Soviets and comprehensively reverse engineer it, meaning that they had some help from the Soviet mechanics, even if they weren't in the ground in China. Among other things as well, the Soviet lunar IR searchlight system was passed on to the Type 69 design, along with other components. The Type 69 in its final version entered service and was publicly revealed in 1982, but however failed to meet the Chinese PLA requirements. This ended up as an export model and eventually produced to an estimate of around about 2,200 to 2,500 vehicles, of which around 2,000 were exported. So this was very similar to the T-72 from the Soviets, where a lot of it was exported to other countries in lesser models. So what I mean by that is chopped down armor, slightly worse stuff, to make sure that other nations didn't have the same machines comparable to their birth nation. Also, the Type 69s were upgraded with Western engines, main gun, and also FCS, which gave birth to another machine, the Type 79, which unfortunately we don't have here now, but hopefully one day we'll be able to have a look at it. So what do you get out of this machine? So you get a 100mm Type 58 rifled gun. It is stabilized and it is very good in game when it comes to its stabilizer. 50 kilometers an hour top speed. You also had a 580 horsepower diesel engine at 2000 RPM, manual loader, 4 crew once again, commander, driver, gunner, loader. They really liked that 4 crew system, and it was around about 36 tons once again. The armor is a sloped glacis, the turret front 180mm are rolled homogeneous armor, so as you can see, not as good as the Type 59. What you're seeing here is a lighter version of the Type 59 with the same firepower, a little bit more maneuverability, but the main issue was obviously its armor not being able to stand up to anything. It's definitely an interesting design, but from people I've talked to, now take this with a pinch of salt, because obviously I can't really confirm this not being there, but this is seen, or at least one of the versions of the Type 69 is a gift vehicle on the Chinese server, meaning that it's not main tree. The other one is main tree. So take that with as what you will. If we do get this transposed onto our server, we're probably not going to see one of the versions of these machines, but I still think it will be worth seeing both of them. Even though it's an export model, I feel the same way as I do with the T72. It should be put into the game under its nation when that nation is added. The Type 69-2 was the main production version of the Type 69. The improvements that it had over the earlier Type 69 was a 100mm rifled main gun, which was much more precise than the smoothbore, a new FCS system counting a TSFC dual-axis gun stabilization system, a Type 70 gunner sight, and a TCR-LA laser rangefinder, and a BCLA ballistics computer. So as you can see, quite a few improvements over the one which they deemed not worthy. The file control system is definitely something to mention though. The laser RF measures the distance to the target and obviously transmits to the ballistic computer, which in turn controlled the automatic range setting mechanism of the sight and simultaneously laying the gun setting to the correct elevation. So all of this was done by a computer. The external laser RF was externally mounted and therefore was vulnerable. So what they did was later replaced it by an optional TSFCSL, combining the LRF with the gun sights in a single unit located inside the turret. The retrofitted TSFCSC combined the gunner's sights, laser rangefinder, ballistic computer, and the console displaying data from the sensors providing elevation, elevation, crosswind, air temperature, ammunition charge temperature, all of these things, meaning that it was much easier for the gunner to do his job. So basically overall, what you got out of the main production version was a lot of new toys for the crew to deal with, which is generally what you get when you go through the versions of a machine. The Type 69-2 had a combat weight of 36.7 tons, power to weight ratio of 15.8 horsepower per ton, which is pretty good, and also ground pressure of 0.82 to 0.83 kilograms per centimeter squared. It had 44 rounds of 100mm that it carried, along with 500 rounds for the roof-mounted 12.7, and around about 3,000 rounds for both the 7.62 LMGs. The ammunition that it used was HEAT, HE, APHE, and APFSDS, so when it comes to War Thunder, APFSDS, and at least three of the models which were developed, one allegedly used depleted uranium caps. So that is something to think about in the future, since a lot of people are making a big deal out of the American version of a depleted uranium round. Well, guess what? Other nations also use them at the same time. The tanks were also fitted with rubber track skirts, double pin track links, and could be recognizable for their storage racks, running all along the turret, which doubled as a bar armor against RPGs. So that's what you actually see around the turret in the model in game. The two banks of 3 smoke grenade launchers are also added on the turret sides, and twin diamond-shaped oil caps could be seen on the angled plate behind the engine deck, which also helped to identify the main production version of the Type 69. So this would be the Chinese top dog in the game if the tree would ever be added. There was also a 2B version and a 2C version, but to be quite honest, there isn't that much difference between what I've just described to you and what you would actually see, from those versions. The main thing though is that the armor was not massively improved compared to the T69-2, which we saw before. So because of that, this machine will still be very lightly armored, but at least it'll have a very impressive gun which could fire all types of different rounds. Just hopefully, if this ever is added into a Chinese tech tree, because that's the only tech tree it could definitely go into, hopefully it's not put at a BR where it is useless, which would be very similar to the Brennus, which we see in game, and the Brennus is obviously worthless where it is, with the Type 69 being pretty much worthless if it was around that BR2. It'd have to be slightly lower to compensate for the fact that it's got quite a slow turret, and also on top of this, not great speed behind its acceleration, no dual drive, and also really bad reverse. So yeah, those are things that we have to take into account. This is the end of looking at the tanks that I've been privy to, and as I said, there's a link in the description if you want to see any of them for yourself. It is all in a user mission, anyone can get access to it, just follow the instructions and you'll be able to do it. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.